Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. In this video we'll be looking at the science of classification. Classification or taxonomy is the science of organising living organisms into groups. This allows scientists to study evolutionary relationships and to recognise and appreciate the biodiversity present at different times in the Earth's history. Traditionally, living organisms are classified based on their physical characteristics. More recently, similarities and differences in DNA are used to classify organisms. The system was designed and developed by a Swedish scientist called Carl Linnaeus. Carl Linnaeus, who lived in the 17th century, decided that all living things should be given just one scientific name, and he chose Latin for the names. The Linnaean system classified organisms within a hierarchy, starting with two kingdoms and then dividing them further down into phylum, classes, orders, families, and eventually genuses and species. Linnaeus thought there were just two kingdoms, the animals and the plants. But recently scientists were thinking that actually there are 5 kingdoms: prokaryotes, protozoa, fungi, plants and animals. Now the accepted model has 3 domains and 6 kingdoms. And it's the flexibility of Linnaeus' model that it can be changed and adapted as new information comes to light, which is one of the strengths of this system of classification. So it was quite recently in schools that we were teaching that there were 2 domains, the prokaryotes with no nucleus, such as the bacteria down here, and eukaryotes which have a nucleus and can be divided into 4 kingdoms: protozoa, fungi, animals and plants. However, that system is not utilized anymore. The more current system is this, a system with 3 domains: bacteria and archaebacteria, each which have no nucleus, and they each contain 1 kingdom. The bacteria domain contains the Eubacteria kingdom, which contains all bacteria and cyanobacteria, which are bacteria that can photosynthesize. The next domain is the Archaea, which contains 1 kingdom, the Archaebacteria, which include primitive bacteria like extremophiles that can live in extreme conditions. For example, here is a hot spring in the Yosemite National Park in America, where the temperatures can reach up to 80 or 90 degrees, and there are bacteria species, Archaebacteria species, that can survive in those conditions. Then we have the eukaryotes, which have a nucleus, and there are 4 kingdoms: the protozoa, which include amoebas, and these are single-celled organisms with a nucleus. You have studied the plasmodium species that cause malaria. That's a protozoa. We have the fungi, including yeast and or mushrooms. These are single cells or even multicellular cells which have a nucleus, a cell wall, but the cell wall is made out of a chemical called chitin. I know it's spelled chitin, but it's a chitin. And this differentiates the fungi from the plant kingdom, which also have a cell wall, but the cell wall is made out of cellulose. And their organisms in the plant kingdom are multicellular with a nucleus. Now the final kingdom is the animals, which we belong to. We are animals, and that means we are multicellular organisms with a nucleus, but we are cells which do not have a cell wall. So with all current information, this is the system that we have begun to implement and utilize currently. But this system has changed over time and will probably change again as more information comes to light. So the system looks a little bit like this. We start with the largest groups, the domains, and then we split into smaller and smaller groups: kingdoms, phylums, class, orders, family, genus or genre, and species. How can we remember this? Well, if we look at these people here who are playing cricket, they belong to a cricket team called the Kent County Cricket Team. And we can ask a question: do Kent play cricket on a firm grass surface? And that will help us to remember domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus and species. But why the need for these smaller and smaller groups? Well, perhaps this little video on the classification of lions will explain.
Classification of living things. What do a worm, a cat, a fish, a bear, a lion, a tiger, a deer, and a tree have in common? They are all living things.
So the smallest group in the classification system is known as a species. So what exactly is a species? Well, a species is a group of organisms with similar characteristics that can breed together and produce fertile offspring. This means their offspring will be able to breed. So we get a flow of genes from one generation to the next. This is best illustrated by discussing horses and donkeys. Now, it is 100% certain that horses and donkeys are very, very similar. They have similar characteristics. And it is also true that horses and donkeys can breed together. In fact, when they breed together, they produce an organism known as a mule. However, mules are infertile. So there's no gene flow from one generation to the next. Therefore, horses and donkeys look similar, but they must be different species and therefore have different Latin binomial names. So a binomial name is an organism's species name, and it's a combination of both the genus and the species that the organism belongs to. So the first word is known as a genus, and a genus is a group of species more closely related to one another than any other group of species. For example, Panthera, with this capital letter to show that it's the genus, is the genus for roaring cats. The second word tells us the species, and that will always have a lowercase letter. For example, Panthera tigris, capital, lowercase, that's a tiger. Genus is Panthera, species Tigris. Remember, we're using Latin names for these binomial classifications. Panthera leo, this is a lion, genus Panthera, species Leo. So very closely related to the tiger, but a different species. And Panthera onca is the jaguar. Again, it's in the same genus, but it has a different species. So these organisms are close enough that they can breed together, and they do produce offspring. But those offspring are infertile, and therefore we define them as being different species. Now, if you're ever typing out a binomial name, we always use italics, or if you are writing it by hand, you must underline it. So why the need? Well, take a look at this plant. This is a traditional treatment for epilepsy. And depending on where you are in the world, this plant has various different names: bacopa, water hyssop, herb of grace. And those are just the English names. But there are also Sanskrit names for it. There is the local name, Bengsaga. But this is a good treatment for epilepsy. So various different scientists around the world have tried to study this. But how can they share information with one another if they all believe they are studying different species? Well, this is where the strength of using the binomial Latin name comes in, because by using that, all the scientists will realize that they are studying the same species and can therefore share information with each other and can then improve and learn from each other as they go. So have a look at some of these species here on the left. What is the genus? What is the species? Pause the video, see whether you can answer it. That's correct. The first plant here, which is the largest flower in the world, Rafflesia arnaldi. Rafflesia is the genus because it has the capital. Arnaldi is the species because it has a lowercase name. We have a tarantula spider, Lacedoria for the capital, Perhabaya for the species. And again, you can try again. Two new species there. What is the genus? What is the species name? So its first one, Diceros, meaning two-horned, that is the genus, and Bicornis is the species, and that's a black rhino. The next one is a codfish, Gadus for the species, Gadus for the genus, Marua for the species. Remember, the genus will always have the capital letter, the species always has the lowercase letter. So as I said before, the classification system designed by Carl Linnaeus has changed often depending on new information and evidence. In the 1970s, the work of Carl Woese led to the introduction of the two-domain system, the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. And this has now been refined into the three-domain system. The exact evolutionary relationship between the three domains have been worked out by comparing the DNA and cell biochemistry. This information has been used to create evolutionary trees, like the one we can see here for the great apes, including our own species, how closely related we all are to each other, or this evolutionary tree here, where we can try and see how closely related the different domains are to each other. Classification can also help to settle confusion about the evolutionary relationships between organisms. For example, pandas and the red panda here. Both animals have what's called a wrist thumb. This is almost like an extra thumb which allows them to help grip onto bamboo and climb trees. Based on the fact that they both have wrist thumbs and their feeding relationships, it looks like both animals must be closely related. However, based on fossil evidence, observations and recent DNA analysis, the panda and red panda are only distantly share a common ancestor, so they're only distantly related. The wrist thumb evolved separately to allow adaptations to two different ecological problems. So if we have a look here for the giant panda and we follow its evolution back, every time we get to one of these areas here, we have what's known as a common ancestor. So the giant panda at this point, if we follow it all the way back to nearly 40 million years ago, the giant panda didn't exist. But this common ancestor did, and that common ancestor, two different populations were able to evolve in two separate ways to fit into two different environments. One way eventually over 40 million years led to the giant panda, and the other way led to the weasel raccoon family, and also via several other common ancestors to the red panda. So they are quite distantly related, only sharing a common ancestor 40 million years ago. But we can now see this with recent DNA analysis. We can build more accurate evolutionary trees, such as the diagram in front of you. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed watching this video on classification. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe and drop me a comment and let me know what you've learned. Thank you very much.